Thank you for tuning in to another edition of the Business of Fun podcast. I'm your host, Dave Wakeman. Today's episode is brought to you by my friends at Booking Protect, the global leaders in refund protection. Any listing, any sector, anywhere, Booking Protect has you covered with the world's most comprehensive refund protection product. To find out how you and your organization can partner with Booking Protect to offer your customers more personalized buying experience, better customer service, and how you can create a new stream of revenue for your organization, visit them at www.bookingprotect.com. Once again, that's www.bookingprotect.com. Booking Protect, the global leaders in refund protection. My guest today is Terrin Waack, who is the host of That's Just Waack podcast. She is also covers NASCAR, Alabama gymnastics, Alabama Crimson Tide football, and a lot more for Tidesports.com and the Tuscaloosa News. I wanted to have Terrin on to talk about something that I feel is a skill that we should all be working to develop more, no matter if we're in sports or in concerts or performing arts, no matter what, which is the art of storytelling. Now, it seems probably a little unusual to have someone who is a journalist on the program, but Terrin tells stories in a way that goes underneath the surface of, just the regular PR spin and things that we typically associate with covering sports or covering NASCAR. She looks to get a little bit more personal, a little bit more in depth, and she looks at focusing on the person and the emotions attached to the story. And those are lessons that I feel are sometimes overlooked or sometimes missed in the rush to hit just the right note in our marketing and selling efforts. So I wanted to have Terrin on and have her talk about how she tells stories. So I hope you dig this conversation between me and Terrin Waack on the Business of Fun podcast. I want to welcome my friend Terrin Waack to the Business of Fun podcast. Terrin, it's not whack to be talking to you. What's happening?
It is not whack.
It's going to be totally pun-filled. Don't worry.
Hey, I'm used to it. So if you can come up with anything new, I'm down.
I didn't say I was creative. I just said I was going to retread some of the same old tired jokes. That's all I can promise.
But if you can break out another one,
yeah, well, we'll see.
I'll be very impressed.
We'll see. We got a few minutes, so you never know what I'll come up with. But thank you for doing this. I know that for people who don't know who you are the host of the That's Just Waack podcast, and you write for the Tuscaloosa News, and you cover Alabama football and Alabama sports on Tidesports.com. You know this. Probably everybody that's listening to this, for the most part, knows this. If they don't know this by now, they will know this now, is that I also went to the University of Alabama. I'm very connected. So anytime I can have somebody who is connected to the University of Alabama on, they have a free pass to come on and talk about whatever they want to talk about. And so I'm glad to have you, because, it has only not been football season for about 14 or 21 days or so right now. So never too soon to start talking about it again.
I feel like because you went to Alabama, I can say Roll Tide without it being unethical as a sports journalust.
That's exactly right. It's Roll Tide.
On an unsports-related note, Roll Tide.
Oh, exactly right. Well, that's like good morning
Right.
or good evening, or how are you doing? If you don't say Roll Tide to somebody, that means you hate them.
Basically being rude.
Yeah, exactly right. It's like bless your heart, but for people from Alabama.
That can be rude.
What's that?
Well, that can be rude.
No, that's what I'm saying.
Way.
If I don't tell you Roll Tide, it's the same as telling you bless your heart. At least the way I grew up. Now, I want to introduce people to, because you do something really interesting for Tuscaloosa News, and you cover NASCAR, right? And there's a lot of stuff going on around NASCAR. They're talking about decline in attendance, decline in viewership. There's a lot of stories that are built around the decline of the sport. But you write a column each week. It's weekly now, right? It's about the business. About
weekly.
Yeah, okay, perfect. Yeah, that's what I thought about NASCAR. But instead of covering it from the typical sports journalist point of view, or covering the business aspect of it, you look at the business of NASCAR through people who just are new to the sport, or they aren't necessarily hardcore fans like you are. So how does that change your view of NASCAR, and how does that help? How do you keep a fresh perspective on a sport that you're a fan of and have been a fan for almost your whole life, so that you can relate it to people who aren't fans, who didn't grow up with the sport?
I try to keep it simple for the most part, and if I'm gonna get complicated, I'll give like a heads up. Since my column, I mean, it's called Miss NASCAR. I don't know if you would say column because it's not like I say I or anything like that, but if it's what I find interesting and what I think people should know about it. Because, I mean, there's only Talladega in Alabama, so it's 2 races a year. I don't know if everyone else out there knows newspapers are struggling sometimes too, so it's not like they're sending me to all the races. Financially can't do that, which is okay. But for Miss NASCAR every week, I'll like start with a short story at the top. Like, for example, my first one, I explained how I got into NASCAR. It's because of my dad. And so I see like family when I think of NASCAR, and you see all the families on the track and stuff like that. So it's not just me, it's the whole sport. And then underneath the little short story will be the Fast Five, like what the rankings are at the time, who's doing the best, who's leading. And then especially when it comes to playoffs, it's like what playoff races are gone, what ones are still left, and things like that. And then there's what happened last week, like in the last race, who won, who got points, like anything interesting that happened. And then it's like, what's next? What track are they going to? Who to watch? Who won their last time? Where to watch it? And if there's any like history about the track that I think people should know, like a nickname and why it's called that. So it's I keep it simple for the most part. If things get complicated, I try to explain it in a very simple way, because what I find interesting about NASCAR is there's so much going on rather than them just going in circles, especially with the points and the stages and all that. And like, that's not even that complicated to follow. So it's trying to break that down and get people to understand why I like it. I mean, I think it's a crazy sport that has a third party that can randomly explode. I mean, a football can't explode. An engine can't explode. So
tires will blow up, right? It's like,
football isn't randomly going to combust. Unless you're the Patriots. But
I was going to say, unless it was Tom Brady, and you never know, then all bets are off. So you said it, not me, but
I can say it. I grew up outside Boston.
Well, the joke I make a lot of times on here is that if anybody's going to say anything stupid or that deserves hate mail, just send it to me. I could care less. But the interesting thing you brought up that I think is we were talking about storytelling when we were setting up the podcast, and I thought that was very interesting because I think one of the things that's really needed more of in the way that people sell events, that they market their sports and entertainment options, is that storytelling aspect. And you talked about family being a key component and sort of like almost a linchpin to the experience of NASCAR. And then you talk about history and nostalgia. How, from a storytelling standpoint and as a journalist, how do you build a story that you think can appeal to a broad audience? Because, I mean, that's pretty much what the job of a journalist is, especially when you're covering sports like this.
Yeah, I think of it more of I'm a storyteller. I'm not a sports analyst. I'm not a play-by-play announcer. So I'm like, what would I want to read? If I'm like scrolling through Twitter, I'm like, hey, this looks interesting. If I see something that's like, a complete breakdown of the X's and O's of the Alabama Ole Miss game, I'm like, next. Like, I mean, I might read it because I have to, and then it'll show me insight. But if you're not an everyday fan of every team, or just not even like Alabama athletics, it's like, why would I want to read that? Like, it's going to be a lot of numbers, a lot of words that some people don't understand. So I move on. And what I do is I find like the people are the most important part. I love showing who the athlete is under the helmet, under the jersey, under the leotard, outside of the car, like things like that. I think that's very important, especially for a sport like Alabama football that's covered on a national basis, even though it's in my state, if that makes sense.
It totally makes sense. It's I think sometimes it's very easy, if we aren't careful, to allow things to become commoditized. Mm-hmm. And, especially like on the scale of NASCAR or Alabama football, right? I mean, it doesn't get really much bigger in sports than Alabama football, that you forget the aspect of it's people that are involved in these games. And there's people underneath the helmets or inside the cars or, when boxing, because I know boxing is another thing you deal with in gymnastics, which is strangely enough, gymnastics has always been historically very big in Alabama, and nobody realizes that. It's very interesting that I think those personal stories are going to give you a greater opportunity to connect with an audience, to build a relationship, right? Because, I mean, you might be a journalist and you might have a podcast, you might have all these things going on, but the thing is like you still have to build a relationship to people, because people are, they might come the first time because it's Tide Sports or Tuscaloosa News, or you're covering the University of Alabama football team, but they're not going to keep coming back to you, right? So maybe the name on the door will get you in the first time, but it's the constant relationship building and meeting and exceeding people's expectations that is likely to make the biggest difference and the highest impact on, whether or not you're able to build a relationship. So I guess this was a convoluted way of asking you about, doing the stuff you do and covering the things you're covering. How do you build relationships both with your audience and with the people you're covering, so that you have, you create a unique value for both the people you're writing about and the people you're writing for?
Honestly, it's just showing up and showing that you are human also, that you care about them outside of their sport. I mean, for example, tonight is Alabama Gymnastics annual Power Pink meet, and it's also Rumble on the River, which is a boxing fight card at the Tuscaloosa River Market. And it's like I can't be at two places at once. And so since I wrote an A1 story on the Power of Pink and did like an in-depth thing on how the DCH Breast Cancer Fund has benefited from Alabama's Power Pink initiative and raising awareness, I'm going to that meet. And because I do every meet. As for boxing, it's like I hate that I'm not going to be there. And I know they were like, we wish you were coming. But I was like, I'll come to the weigh-in the night before, even if it's like I'm getting maybe 50 words added to my story with just the weight of each boxer. But it's just showing that you care and like you want to put the extra effort in, and you're not going to be like, well, I don't have to be there, so I'm not going. If it's not needed, it's not needed. But no, like just showing up, even if you're not writing a story, is needed, because it's all about relationships.
Well, I think that like I couldn't have said it any better. It's so true. It's just like, hey, look, I care about you as a person, and even though we're doing a job, that doesn't mean that I don't care about you, the person. Again, and I think it kind of goes back to maybe the status of the culture a little bit, is that sometimes we just like are so me focused that we forget that like, we're, at the most basic biological level, we're pack animals, right? So we need other people. And the way I always do it is like to build relationships and to create more value and help people. It just makes it's fun. Number one, most of the time, and not always fun. Nothing's always fun, but then it makes you feel better, and it makes the other person feel better. So that's like another positive thing. And I think in a world like so dominated so much by technology, that alone is like a nice side benefit of it. But that's just me. I'm a noted tree hugger in most cases. So
I think it's important to remember you are doing your job, like form these relationships, but they are still who you're covering. You're not friends. You're not going out on Fridays. And if you are, like, you shouldn't be having a work relationship, at least in a journalist subject kind of way. But there's nothing wrong with being like, how's the family? Like, I know you started this new diet, or like you're picking up croquet on the weekends. It's like okay to know who they are as a person, or if they frequent one place in town over another, like say hi. They're not gonna rat you out for being like friendly. I mean, if you're going and buying them everything they need for stories, that's obviously unethical, but it's not, there's no harm in going up to someone at a restaurant and be like, hey, it's good to see you. It's kind of more awkward to ignore them when you see them every other day.
Yeah, I was going to say it's just because you're friendly doesn't mean you're like trying to like bribe somebody or buy them off. That is not the truth. But if anybody wants to bribe either one of us, just send us an email. It's totally fine. Now, one of the things I want to ask you about too is you cover. You brought it up. You talked about boxing, and boxing in Alabama is actually like a little bit bigger, I think, than most people imagine. And I know there's a number of boxing gyms and there's a number of champions in and around Tuscaloosa, and that's number one, it's like, to me, it's always kind of interesting when I hear I think that Deontay Wilder was just fighting in London, and was that right? Or
Los Angeles.
Los Angeles, okay. But I was in London when it was getting covered, and it was like a big story in London.
Yeah, because one of the his opponent, Tyson Fury, was from London.
Yes, that's what it was. Yes, and right, and it was like really interesting because they kept talking about this guy from Tuscaloosa, Alabama, in London. I was like, oh, this is so great. But so, how did you get into covering boxing, and what is it about the sport that's appealing to you?
So I've been covering boxing for a year now, actually. When the person who covered boxing before me left the Tuscaloosa News, it was open, and our editor was like, hey, like, do you want to cover it? And everyone was like, eh. I'm like, I do. Why wouldn't I? Like, it could land me in different cities and a whole new sport. Like, sure. I mean, I'm also kind of person that's like willing to try everything.
You'll get all that traveling that you don't get for NASCAR by covering boxing.
I'm like, I can leave the SEC.
Don't let the editor hear this.
It's like I can leave the SEC for once too.
We got to totally get you in trouble on this one.
I would say this to their face.
All right, sorry. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
But I got into it when he left, and it was like just learning the sport. It helped that like my editor at the time, his brother was Deontay's trainer. Not that like he ever crossed any lines in that way, but he knew the sport really well in Deontay's history. So he like sat me down and was like, this is how boxing works. This is how you do knockouts. This is what a technical knockout is. This is what a draw is. And I was like, okay, like I got it. And then I also picked up kickboxing, so which I know is completely different. Never tell a boxer that kickboxing is the same, and never tell a kickboxer that boxing is the same. Doesn't go well. But I at least knew like what an uppercut, right hook, left hook, cross, and jab all looked like. So it was great, and I got to go to LA for the Fury Wilder fight, and that was my first time to California, first time covering a boxing fight, and also completely on my own. So I was like, we're jumping full in for this. But I love adventures like that where you can just say, screw it, I have to do it, let's do it. That was a great fight, and obviously the rematch is going to be finalized sometime soon from what I've heard, and it's going to be Fury Wilder Part 2, hopefully in the States, and hopefully not somewhere expensive, because as I said, newspapers aren't loaded with money always. But oops, sorry about the ding. And yeah, it's been an adventure. I like Deontay's a huge name and everyone covers him, but what I enjoy also is getting to know the ones who are getting better. Like Dion Nicholson has the WBC US cruiserweight title, and so he's on his way to becoming a world champion, or wanting to at least. And so being able to sit down with him and hear his journey more so, and boxers overcome so much. I mean, Dion is open and honest about his time in jail, and then now like how he's overcome that. So they have incredible stories.
Yeah. I mean, again, one of the things too is that, especially for the people listening is, and the reason I like you is because of all the storytelling aspect, and you don't lose sight of the humanity. And I think it's really cool, the way, because like every time you talk about, everything kind of is infused with the story. And I really do like that. But let's go back to this trip you took to LA for the Deontay Wilder thing. Because I think people sometimes, a lot of people that listen to this thing, the podcast, are in events. They are, but a lot of them are sports or concert or theater. So they don't necessarily always get the same feeling for boxing, because boxing isn't necessarily, it's pretty limited in where it goes. I know there's some fights at Madison Square Garden, LA, Las Vegas. There's a few fights here in DC at the MGM in Maryland. But from a professional standpoint, as somebody who covers a lot of events and who sees a lot of large crowds and a lot of different audiences, what makes what about the experience of covering a big time boxing match is unique compared to NASCAR or Alabama football or even Alabama gymnastics?
Oh boy.
See, nothing but the easy questions. I'm like total softballs for you.
Ooh, I'm like trying to think. It wasn't even that long ago, but so much has happened. Boxing draws a different fan group. That's fair to say. And those who know it, know it. It's not like football where you know the sport or you know your team. It's like people who know boxing know all of boxing. I'm like, good for you. But I was surprised how many people came from England and the UK to see Tyson Fury. I'm pretty sure there were more UK and Fury fans than there were Deontay Wilder, even though we were in the US. I was confused for a second. I was like, did I somehow end up overseas? But for me, it was very shocking to see when Tyson Fury got knocked down the first time. I was gasping. I was like, okay, that man is not getting back up. And then he got back up. But everyone is cheering and freaking out that this guy literally just got floored. I was like, that could hurt so bad. I was definitely the one that gasped and was like, is he going to be okay? But then he got knocked down again and everyone is still just freaking out. I don't know how he got up that second time. Nobody knows. He doesn't even know. But it's just interesting to see how reactive the audience is. And with boxing, this is what's the best part about it is you cannot take your eyes off the fight for a second, because you could think that hit didn't look that hard, but it could knock someone down and you're like, well, I just missed all the action. So the entire time, I was typing and taking notes, but my eyes never left my computer. I'm pretty sure I spelled half my words wrong, and thank God for autocorrect, but you can't take your eyes off the ring. And that is what's so interesting. It's yeah, people are captivated in football, hey, a field goal, or hey, a Hail Mary, everyone's watching. But for boxing, everyone is watching the entire time. Maybe the only time they breathe or look away is in between rounds, which lasts only a couple minutes.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting too, and that's sort of why I asked you the question, because if you cover a lot of sports, right, or if you go to a lot of events, you do any of these things enough, right, you become a little bit sort of, I don't want to say immune to it, but or jaded, because I hope that these things don't happen, but you lose that sense of wonder. And since I kind of knew that you still had the sense of wonder about the boxing, I wanted to ask you that to put you on the spot a little bit, because I think it's very informative of people, because something I may have seen 1,000 times, if you're seeing it the first time, the way you experience it is going to be entirely unique, right? And that's that's really about being a good marketer is. That's what being a good writer is. Maybe it's even worth being a good podcaster is making sure that you can see the world through the eyes of everybody you're dealing with, the people you're working with or serving, or in your case, writing for or speaking to. And you don't put your bias of having seen it a million times before onto them, because it's unfair to everybody else, right? Because there's a joy, right? I mean, how long have you been covering Alabama football now?
4 years.
Okay, 4 years. So you've seen a fair amount of winning. You can say that, right? That's fair. I can say you've seen a fair amount of winning, and I know, and our mutual friend, who is no stranger to people who listen to the podcast regularly, Corey, he backs me up because we went to school at the same time. Is we've seen a lot of winning the last 11 years, but we also saw a lot of losing for a long time. And I think for this is a point to impress upon people is Terrin's seen 4 years of winning. One of these days, Nick Saban won't be the coach. Hopefully, he lives forever, but he won't be the.
Because I don't want to write that right now.
Yeah.
Or anytime soon.
No, it's not that. I don't want to go anywhere anytime soon either. I love the man. I'm a big fan, but but it's not guaranteed. It's not no guarantee that it'll always be the same experience. And I think it's always probably a challenge for you to write with a fresh set of eyes, right? And I want the lesson I want to give to everybody is it really takes a lot of hard work to keep seeing things with a fresh set of eyes over and over and over again. And that's why it's really awesome to talk to someone like you who's really just getting a lot of these experiences for the first time, because it can highlight things, right? It'll seem oh my God, this is so great, right? I get out of SEC country.
Yeah.
I mean, this is so cool. But let me ask you about the podcast now. I just said the name a second ago. That's Just Waack. Not That's Just Waack. Like I said the first time we talked. Tell us a little bit about your podcast.
Oh gosh. So my podcast wasn't even my idea. My editor at the time, Tommy Dees, literally sat me down one day and was like, hey, you're getting a podcast. And I was like, why? We already have some overall ones like the Bama Beat or Tide Sports Unfiltered. Like, why am I getting my own? He's like, I don't know. Like, I just think you have a lot of personality, and I really like the name. That's Just Waack. And I was like, seriously? Like, you're giving me a podcast, a responsibility, a commitment just because of my last name?
Just off a joke. Keep that in mind. It's all on a joke.
Like a weekly commitment now because of a joke. But
it seems reasonable enough. I mean, this started as a joke, so don't knock it.
It's great, and like I was like, fine, but like I'm not like I'm going to talk about what I want. He's like, fine. I was like, great. And so I've literally ranged from topics like Corey came on to talk about tickets. I've had people come on to talk about the latest Bachelor episode. I've had Sarah Patterson came on this past week to talk about the power of pink. It ranges ridiculously. My sister came on and we just talked about anything, and it's just. Some episodes get more views or listens than the others, but there's like a consistent following where I guess it's just some people like that it's different topics all the time and that it's very carefree, sometimes too carefree, which is fine. But
I think that's a positive. I mean, I think that like you shouldn't be too serious about these things. I mean, I mean, for better or for worse, it's the same thing here. I could be like completely serious, so don't let them steal that thunder.
I think the first 5 minutes of my sister and I's episode was just straight up laughing because she couldn't take me seriously. Like I would like start the intro and she would just start laughing. So I'd try again and she'd laugh and it just was a mess. I was like, whoops.
But probably that's like going to be that's probably the best episode though, right? Because like, you know, it's really show. I think, and you tell me I could be wrong. Most of the time I am. Is that like, having your sister on there and having it laugh and having this like sort of more personal relationship, it probably helps everything you do. Or maybe I'm wrong.
Everything I do as in?
Like, you know, all the stuff, like it helps with the podcast, right? Because it's more authentic. But then it helps you with the people who are reading your columns and your articles and online or in the paper. I mean, it just gives people just a more holistic view of who you are.
Yeah, that's a good point. Because I like to be very true to myself and my personality. I am on my podcast. My Twitter is the same way. I've been told a lot that like my writing is like my voice and you can like basically hear how I would say it. I definitely put a little sass in my stories depending on the topic, which might come back to bite me in the butt one day, but it's fine. My old editor used to encourage it.
I would say stick with the sass. Keep the personality. That's exactly. Me, though.
It, like, separates me. I know when to take it away and tone it down, but when, like, if Nick Saban ever gives me a sassy answer, which he tends to do for some reporters or even any reporter, I'm like, fine, I'll give it right back in writing. Like, this is my outlet. Don't knock it.
So I stick with the sass. So you brought up Nick Saban. Do you have a good Nick Saban story for us?
I don't know if it's like good or great, but like I just remember the first
I'll be the judge.
It was the first time he like gave me that snarkiness. It was like a post game. It was the game. I don't remember who it was against, but it was the game where Alabama muffed like 3 punts. 4 even, I don't know, but they just kept botching the punts. I'm like, can you catch the ball? But I asked, and now I know not to phrase it like this, but I asked like what went wrong on special teams, specifically punt return, and I guess the trigger word there was wrong, like what went wrong, and he low-key was like, what went wrong, like building up, what went wrong? He dropped the ball. Did anyone not see what went wrong? He dropped the ball. And he like stopped and like composed himself, and I'm like sitting here just like not shaking, maybe a little nervous, but I'm like, I'm not gonna look away. And then he went on and answered the question in like a beautiful way of how he coaches them to do it and all that. I'm like, fine, get your like snap out and then go ahead and answer my question. Like, that's all that matters. And you're welcome, SEC Country, ESPN, Bleacher Report, for the quick clip.
Everybody wants to be a meme.
After my coworker was like, hey, you handled that really well. I was like, I had to deal with this one girl in high school who was the worst. Nick Saban does not scare me. If I could handle that B word, I can handle anyone.
If I can deal with the Mean Girls, I can deal with Nick Saban. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I would put that in the show notes. That's like the takeaway.
High school was savage. I don't even want to know what it's like now with social media. Or like junior high. I think it was even junior high.
I was going to say, this is like completely off topic, but again, this is my podcast and you're on it, so we can talk about whatever we want to, like in honor of your podcast. My son's in third grade now, and like it seems like the girls in like elementary school are savage, and I'm like, I'm so glad I got a boy. I'm so glad, because I was like, they're already like mean girls in some of them. I'm like, this is crazy.
I don't think the meanness kicked in until junior high, like 8th grade maybe. And it still wasn't even as bad as what it is today. Like back then it would be like, ooh, you have last month's Hollister t-shirt or something like that. Like,
oh yeah.
Dumb. I'm like, oh great, like let me go cry. Like, and now it's like you can't escape it. There's like things on Instagram, Snapchat, and once it's out there, every child needs to know, once it's on the internet, I don't care if it's Snapchat where it goes away in 24 hours. No.
Doesn't go away.
It goes away.
Nothing goes away.
And everyone can find it. I'm like a savage at finding things people don't want to know on the internet.
The Wayback Machine.
Terrin's
mad awesome at the Wayback Machine. Well, all right. Well, where can everybody find all the stuff you do?
God, do you have like 20 minutes for me to list it?
Sure. Kidding. I mean, it's just digital space. There's plenty of room.
It's also true. Well, you can follow me on Twitter, which is basically where I put all my content at Terrin Victoria, TerrinVictoria. You can follow the same on Instagram. That's my sports one. Don't look for my personal one, because it's private.
See, you open it up. You open the door. People are going to be like, all these random people are going to be like, let's hook up. Let's connect.
That's why I made a sports one, because like all my Twitter followers, I would recognize like Roll Tide Roll 101 followed you on Instagram. I'm like, no, like that's mine. So I made a sports one, and then they all migrated that way, which is fine. But like I also don't need everyone and their mother seeing like my friend and I maybe at like Chuck's for dinner. Like, no, I'm good.
Yeah, you don't need to see me out like doing something goofy that no one needs to see any of this.
Like the profile picture's enough. And then tidesports.com and TuscaloosaNews.com. Tide Sports is all University of Alabama content, so that's where you'll find Alabama football, gymnastics, and the other teams. And then Tuscaloosa News will have that along with boxing and NASCAR.
Oh, that's awesome. And don't forget to subscribe and listen to Terrin's podcast. That's Just Waack. It's whack that it started because of a joke. Totally not a new joke, but I told you I would just rehash the old ones over and over and over again. But really, I'm glad we had a chance to talk. Get a chance to talk. I think your emphasis on storytelling and being able to see the world through the eyes of someone who is just experiencing these things for the first time, or even through your column, Miss NASCAR, having to experience things like a beginner over and over and over again. I think it's really informative for people who are, who even read the columns, but then also who work on these kind of, boxing and football and NASCAR and all the and gymnastics and anything else, because you have to remember that, like, just because I've seen it 1,000 times before, it doesn't mean that everybody's seen it 1,000 times before. And being able to step out of yourself and look at the world the way others will is really a powerful thing to have the ability to do. So, Terrin, thank you for taking the time to do this.
Thank you so much. I liked how you were talking about like seeing everything for the first time. I mean, when you think about it, you're never seeing the same thing twice. Just being very technical here, like players are different, plays are different, venues are different, weights are different. Like everything is different. Yeah, you're never seeing the same game again. So never take a single thing for granted.
That's awesome, and that is something I actually you said it. I didn't tell you to say it, but I do say it pretty regularly, because each time you do anything that's going to have a live component to it, it's one of a kind. It's the only time it's ever going to happen. And I wish I had set you up to say that point, but that makes it even better that I did not set you up to say.
No, you did not.
So
I like to think of everything that way in life in general, because hey, you never know when something's going to end, whether that's football, your life, or sports as a whole.
Right. No, that's exactly right. Well, thank you again, Terrin.
Thank you so much.
Once again, I want to thank my friend Terrin Waack for taking the time to be on the Business of Fun podcast. As always, you can find out what I'm up to by visiting my website. That's www.davewakeman.com. You can find my blog, which I update almost every day now for over a year, I believe, where I talk about value, marketing, strategy, sales, all that great stuff, revenue. You can follow me on Twitter. It's at David Wakeman. I'm still looking for that guy who has the at Dave Wakeman Twitter handle to give it up so I can have it. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. If you like what I'm doing, if you have a question, idea, concern, thought, whatever it is, send me an email. It is my name, dave@davewakeman.com. Finally, if you like what I'm doing with the podcast, I'd love it if you'd subscribe. We're on iTunes. We're on SoundCloud. We're on Stitcher. We're on all the major platforms at this point. Like the podcast. Review it. Share it with just one person. Whatever you can do, it helps grow the podcast grow. It helps make sure that I continue to deliver really great content, and it means the world to me. One last thing before we go, I want to thank Booking Protect one more time for sponsoring the episode. To find out how you and Booking Protect can partner to give your customers a better buying experience, more peace of mind in their purchases, and how you can create a new revenue stream for your organization, visit them at www.bookingprotect.com. Once again, that's www.bookingprotect.com. And until I talk to you again, thanks so much for listening, and take it easy. I'll see you soon.